Do you think, is there anything that you could pinpoint that they did in particular that kind of allowed them to hack their way or find a shortcut to create this trust? Because that's obviously a big topic for us as well. We're dealing with the most meaningful transaction in a particular person's life. They're selling or buying a home, and all of a sudden Loft shows up and wants to be that trustworthy counterparty. Is there anything that you could pinpoint in like TransferWise's storyline that accelerated this building of trust?
So honestly, it's very strange, and I think it's not easy to replicate what TransferWise did, but there were two things. One was honestly cultural within the company, and I'll talk about that in a second. And the other was really thinking about a funnel very differently. So most companies, if you know what a funnel is, where it's like you have the top of the funnel, which is awareness. And then you have the bottom of the funnel, the smallest part, which is a conversion. Somebody actually makes a transaction. So most companies, they focus on making the funnel wider so it doesn't shrink down where it's like you get all this stuff at the top that kind of goes into a few droplets of liquid at the bottom. What TransferWise did was they turned the funnel into a megaphone at the end. So here's what I mean by that. Most companies, again, they focus on getting to the conversion and then it's like, hurrah, we got to the conversion. TransferWise, at the end of a conversion, if you go send money from Real to euros, at the end, they will probably tell you, here's how much every bank would have charged you for the transaction. And it's like, these guys would have ripped you off and charged you this much. These guys would have ripped you off. And like, why do they do that? The transaction already happened. They don't need to improve the conversion rate. The conversion is done. This is what I mean by turning it into a megaphone. So they give you all of this reinforcement that TransferWise is good. And then they say, tell your friends. And you're like, wow, holy shit, you really did save me a lot of money. These banks suck. I'm going to tell my friends. So that was one. The second thing that they did, which is very, very strange, which goes against kind of all business school theories, is that normally if you go to a business school, which I did not do, I was either smart enough or dumb enough not to do, they will teach you never compete on price. Because if you compete on price, whoever has the lowest price or the highest price wins. So you want to compete on value. You want to have value-based pricing. And TransferWise said, that's stupid. We're going to compete on price. And so what does this mean? Every month, and actually you've probably seen this in Brazil if you use it, if they have enough people using TransferWise, they will lower their prices even though they're the cheapest by far. So they'll send you an email saying, hey, Mate, good news. We lowered our prices by 50%. And you're like, why did you do that? You're already cheaper than like everybody else by 99%. And they keep doing that, and it builds trust. So you don't have to shop around and say, is TransferWise still good? Maybe there's another player out there. It's like every month they keep telling you we lowered prices. And then whenever you do a conversion, they're super honest. They'll even tell you like, hey, here's somebody who's cheaper than us. You might want to use them. It was actually, incidentally, one of the reasons why Amazon became such an enormous business is Amazon was not afraid to show competitors. So if you went to look for a book on Amazon and you saw it was $10, they would show you, here's the same book at Barnes & Noble for $9. And that was smart for building trust, but it was also smart because every time you clicked on that ad, they got the ad revenue, and they used that ad revenue to lower the cost of the Amazon book. So it actually bled Barnes & Noble dry. So that's one of the things. So part of it was that, in terms of like how TransferWise became very successful. The other part, as I mentioned, was cultural. And here's what I mean by that. So TransferWise, even though it's doing great, it's very profitable, it's worth billions of dollars now, has 1,500 people working there. But there was a time where they were almost out of money and broke. And why was that? Well, I guess I painted somewhat of a false story where like they don't spend money on advertising. They used to spend money on advertising. So they spent no money on advertising, and then they're like, oh, let's hire people that went to business school. And no disrespect to people that went to business school. My wife went to business school. I love her very much. So we should spend money on advertising. And a bunch of the VCs at the time were like, you should spend money on advertising. Okay, let's do that. They were spending tons of money on advertising, and they were running out of money. So then they said, okay, we are not going to spend another dollar on advertising, and we're calling it Project Dry Land. Because if we get to dry land, we're not going to sink, by sink going bankrupt, which they were perilously close to doing at one point in time. So they basically said, how are we going to get to profitability and to grow our business without spending our money on advertising? And this is echoed throughout the organization. Okay, we have to double down our efforts to build a better product. The only lever that everybody in this organization has, and we're all in this boat together and rowing in unison, is we have to innovate on the product. We have to innovate on the referral program. Like, these are the only tools that you have solve the problem. And that was kind of a cultural call to arms, if you will, that caused TransferWise to really get out of a predicament. And they've done a phenomenal job on all things product and all things referral, and this kind of culture, both from an employee perspective of like, here are the levers that you have to change the business, and from a consumer perspective, which is, it's not value-based pricing. We will keep cutting our own prices when we have no competition, versus the like, we're going to maximize our price and try to capture this consumer surplus. Their goal is to eliminate the consumer surplus, which is a very strange attitude.
I think, maybe shifting gears a little bit from that and starting to kind of going towards the prop tech arena, or I guess doing the parallel from fintech over to like a subset of the fintech world, which is prop tech. How did you kind of develop your thesis? Because it really sounds like you have a thesis around prop tech now, and specifically vertical marketplaces, vertical property technology companies like Loft that take inventory risk and ultimately make the transaction just a lot more transparent and a lot more pleasurable for the user. Maybe talk a little bit about this evolution that you've seen, kind of from like static classifieds to real estate classifieds like a Viva Real or OLX, and then on towards kind of the third, fourth generation, which is the Lofts of the world.
Yeah, so part of it is the availability of capital. So when you don't have a lot of capital, so eBay famously, I think, only raised $5 million ever between the formation of the company and the IPO. And if you look at eBay today, I mean, they built an amazing business, but it was very capital light. So if you wanted to go buy something on eBay, you deal with the seller directly. You have to figure out the way to get the money to them. Like, eBay did not come with PayPal built in. It was in many cases cash on delivery. It might take 3 to 4 weeks to get your item. So it invented commerce on the internet. Not invented, but they really helped commerce on the internet, but it wasn't actually very good. And then Amazon came along and ate eBay's lunch, because they said, you know what, we're going to stock items in our warehouse. We're just going to do everything and vertically integrate it. We're going to have our own payments. We're not going to outsource it to a third-party company called PayPal. We don't have to buy that company in the future. We're just going to do everything ourselves. And if you can afford to do that, the consumer experience and the product is just so much better than having this kind of hodgepodge of different parts that are all taped together. And a great example of this is really the taxi industry. So if Uber and Lyft were invented 20 years ago and they were told, okay, it's 1999, maybe 1999, there was a lot of money back then, but nobody had a mobile phone. So it's 1995 or it's 2005. And those were eras where the amount of capital available to startups was not nearly as high as it is right now. And part of the reason, by the way, is not that VCs like me are crazy. It's like the 5 biggest companies on earth are technology companies. It's Google, it's Alphabet, it's Apple, it's Amazon, it's Microsoft, it's Facebook. I mean, those are bigger than GE, Exxon, like the biggest companies, not just based on like what their stock price is, but their profits, their sustainable moats. They're all technology companies. So this is part of the reason why. So, but what I was saying, in 1995 or 2005, if you were to build a taxi company, you would just build software, sell it to taxi sell it to taxi companies, and the end result for consumers would be terrible. And I think that that is what the real estate industry has been for a long time. It was like that 75 years ago, before the internet, but it was like that in 1995 and in 2005 when innovations started happening, but they were very capital light. In that they were effectively lead generation marketplaces. I mean, what Craigslist does and what Zillow does is not that different, because at the end of the day, they just want to get your phone number and then have lots of people call you and try to offer you the exact same product at the end of the day. Now, why didn't Zillow only raised $15 million in their first round. If they raised $15 million and they're operating in Seattle and the Bay Area, that would allow them to buy like 10 homes. So they couldn't really make the math work. But I think they realized that, sure, if they could do this, like if there was $1 billion available, like Open Doors raised $1 billion, if there was $1 billion available, you could probably build something that was 100 times better, that consumers want. And just like eBay versus Amazon in 2019, I mean, eBay is about 4% or 5% the market cap of Amazon. I mean, it's like a rounding error. Even though they theoretically have a better business model from a margin structure, but almost like my TransferWise comment, who cares? Like, you're not trying to maximize the amount of profit that you're taking from the marketplace if you're not delivering the best product, the best experience, and in particular liquidity. Because it's actually very similar. eBay, all right, I found something I want to buy. I go back and forth with the seller. And actually, you know why eBay bought Skype? Little known fact, in 2005, I think eBay bought Skype for $3 billion because Meg Whitman, the CEO of eBay, thought it would help buyers and sellers communicate better for like buying something. I don't want to communicate with the seller. I just want to buy the thing, and I want it to show up in 1 hour. And that's what Amazon does. They give you liquidity in terms of purchasing. Like the faster operational abilities that they have, the more people that buy stuff on Amazon versus going to the store. And eBay is like, we're going to let you talk to the seller. It's like, why? That doesn't make any sense. The same thing is true for real estate, which is, if it takes 6 months to sell your house, man, you put me in touch with 5 agents who will talk to me more. I don't want that. I just want to sell it right away. Or if I want to, like one of the biggest things that I've seen happening is this idea of mobility being constricted by people's ownership in homes. So on the one hand, I'm going to refer to this as the American dream, but it might be the Brazilian dream as well. The American dream was everybody has their plot of land, they have their house with their backyard and their poodle or something, and their 2.4 kids. And that was the American dream. So the problem is that the American dream sometimes becomes an American nightmare where I'm stuck in this house, I want to move, I got a much better job 2,000 miles away, I can't move because I can't sell my house. That's not good. So that's some of the background why I think it's really interesting. And then what I saw, and I mentioned this to some of the team earlier, I used to write for TechCrunch, a technology site, just kind of on the side, and I coined this term. I came up with this term O to O, so online to offline. So if you Google O to O, there's a bunch of stuff in Chinese, and then there's me, because I invented the term, and then the Chinese copied it. I became friendly with all of these guys, like Groupon. Actually, I know Julio at Pesce Urbano very well. So everybody who was starting one of these O2O companies reached out to me, and they all started like the same week. It was kind of crazy. So like Groupon starts because it was a really good business model. How do you buy something online that gets delivered to you offline? Because e-commerce used to be stuff in a box. So you buy something, it gets shipped to you in a box. If it was eBay 4 weeks later, if it was Amazon, maybe 2 days later. And then there was travel. So like buying hotels, buying airplane tickets. Then O2O is stuff like Rappi or stuff like Groupon. So Groupon comes up with this model. It turns out the offline market is so much bigger than the online market. People spend the vast majority of their income offline, not online at the time in 2010. And then there were all these other companies in other geographies that popped up because this is just a great market. And I see the same thing happening. This is actually what really attracted me to Loft, which was when I met Florian and Mate. I saw the same kind of beginnings in prop tech as I saw for, I hate to call it the daily deal space, but offline commerce, which is like, of course this is a big industry. It was a big industry 20 years ago, but now everybody's ready for it. The consumers are ready for it because they're tired of getting called by 40 real estate agents that don't really help them. They're tired of being stuck in their house with their 2.4 kids and they can't move. So the time is finally right for this. And then it's going to pop up in all of these different regions across the world at the same time. So can we find the right entrepreneurs that are working on this in as many different geographies as possible? Because you can't just make one bet, wait 10 years, see, oh, I hope this worked, and then I'll bet on a bunch of other ones. No, the industry is going to be built out. I mean, think about social networking. Like Facebook was started in 2004, Friendster, I think 2003, MySpace 2005. In Russia, the biggest one is Vkontakte, which was started, I think, 2005, 2006. But there's not like a new social network that was started in like 2019. Like it doesn't happen. It's just all of these things kind of tend to get formulated at the same time. So that was kind of what excited me. It was just this primordial soup of like consumers want it. The investors are actually ready for it as well. Like that's kind of the other thing that happened that I'm not sure how many people are familiar with the business of rentals, but real estate is one of the best asset classes ever. Like if you actually had permanent property rights, like if you wanted to invest in anything 2,000 years ago and then have it still have value in 2019, so you get to put money in something in the year 19, it's got to have value in 2019, it's probably real estate, right? Because there's a finite amount of it, and if you just find, I mean, you don't want to pick it in the wrong place, in the middle of the desert, bad, but in the middle here, pretty good, and it's going to inflate in value because the land is constant, but its value in the local currency will go up. So anyway, so there's a lot of interest as well for people that want to buy real estate type assets or buy income producing real estate or buy loans in real estate. Like there's always been a big market for that, but they would typically buy, like in the United States, mortgage-backed securities or things like that. Now they love the fact that there are companies like Open Door popping up because they have a new way of acquiring real estate assets that are being originated by startups. Like that's kind of one of the other components of this primordial soup. The primordial soup, if people don't get the term, is like what were the ingredients to create life on Earth like 2 billion years ago? And it was like you got the lightning, you got the oxygen, you got the amino acids, and then life emerges. And you have this often happen for new categories in startup land where you have all these different right categories that have to emerge. Like you couldn't have built Uber before the smartphone. Like just wouldn't have worked. You couldn't have built YouTube before camera phones or before high-speed internet connections. And like for something like Loft and for kind of prop tech in general, you need a bunch of these different components to exist. And they now do, which is really exciting, including consumer trust, I would argue. There's distrust of the incumbents, and therefore it's like, hey, you're giving me money same day, like I'll take it.
I think your airline parallel was really interesting because obviously conceptually we would all agree that the airline does most of the work in the airline industry. They're the ones that literally pick you up and take you overnight to London. They take most of the economic risk, and they're obviously the most capital-intensive piece in the value chain. However, they accrue a lot less benefit than like a kayak would. I think, one of the things that we think a lot about here is how do we make sure that we are truly the matchmaker of the market and we're not just taking inventory risk to take it. So thinking about kind of the future evolution of the company, how do we keep creating value for all stakeholders? How do we make this a win-win-win for both sellers, buyers, and us as an intermediary in the process, and really become something that has like proprietary value in the market? I think the concept of becoming a destination, a higher frequency destination, rather than just that place that every 10 years you want to sell or buy a home you think of, I think is something really fascinating. I think what might be worth delving into there, because it's also kind of a recurring conversation that comes up. You mentioned the Groupon model and how some of the stakeholders, it wasn't actually a win for them. And we obviously hear a lot of concerns from the broker community and from other intermediaries in the real estate market that like iBuyers or like models like a Loft or an Open Door could potentially be a threat or aren't necessarily good for the broker community. I think it might be interesting to kind of like get your thoughts on that, because I'm actually convinced that we enable brokers and we very much want to proactively work with intermediaries. But it'd be cool to hear kind of how you think the role of the agent and the broker will evolve in the future.
Yeah, so the video that I think some of you have seen has caused some backlash in the agent community in the United States. I get hate mail from them every day. But one way of thinking about this is nobody needs a personal trainer. Like if you want to go to the gym and work out, you can go to YouTube, you can talk to your friend. Like, why do you need a personal trainer? Some people use a personal trainer for motivation to actually do the thing that they know they're supposed to do. Sometimes they use it for guidance. It's like, all right, how do I do this a little bit better? But you don't actually need to have a personal trainer. The same thing goes for, like a finance manager. Like some people have like a estate planner or a wealth manager, or I don't know what the term is, but somebody that helps manage your money. Even for like people that have very, very little money, they want to talk to a human because it just helps them do the right thing. I know I should do 100 sit-ups every day. Why do I hire somebody to tell me to do 100 sit-ups every day? Because I know that I'll do it. So sometimes the human connection is actually helpful just for explaining a very episodic, like, what is an LTV? What mortgage? What does that mean? What do I have to do? Like, walk me through this. I know I can read it on the internet, but I don't want to do that. Just like I know I can read how to do a squat on the internet, but I don't want to do that either. I want a person. So I think, there are two ways of thinking about this from the broker perspective. One is that, okay, this is the enemy, they're hurting us. But the other is that if the broker owns that personal relationship with the consumer, just like if the personal trainer, I'm making this up on the spot, but if the personal trainer owns the relationship with the person at the gym, like having more machines at the gym is good. Like having more stuff to do is good. In this case, having an iBuyer, like, all right, I want to sell my house. I really want the personal attention of a human. I don't want to go on my mobile phone and sell my house. That sounds scary. I might be getting ripped off. There might be evil people on the internet. I don't trust anybody. What do I do with the money? Let me talk to my personal trainer / financial planner. I go talk to my financial planner / real estate agent here. And they'll say, okay, here are your options. You can list it. Actually, if you want, you can get paid tomorrow. And here's where that might make sense. And then, you know what? If you get paid tomorrow, now you have money that can be a down payment for another transaction. So actually, what happened was Opendoor bought a brokerage called Open Listings. And the reason why they did that was they found that I think it was 70% of people that went to opendoor.com to look at houses that Opendoor currently held on its balance sheet that they were trying to sell. They did so without having a broker. And Opendoor gave you 3 options. So like, okay, bring your own broker, BYOB. Go buy it directly without a broker, or have us introduce you to a broker. And a lot of people clicked on option 3, which, if the agents saw that, they should feel very happy about it, because it means that rather than these companies being a giant threat, they're actually going to kind of allow more liquidity, so allow quicker buyer and selling, and give agents more things to do. Like, the problem actually in the agent community is that many of them are effectively unemployed or underemployed. And when you have new innovative models, like, one of the ones that I'm on the board of is called Divvy. There are millions of people that can't afford to buy a house. They can afford to rent, they can't afford to buy a house. So what does an agent do with people that can't afford to buy a house? Nothing, because they can't buy a house, and agents sell houses. So what Divvy does is they go to the agent and say, hey, next time you find somebody that can't afford to buy a house, we'll buy the house and we'll rent it to the person. And the agent's like, holy moly, this is great, because now I get paid a commission on these millions of people that could never buy. So, there are certain things long-term that threaten agents, especially the ones that don't really do anything. But I think that the human connection is going to be very, very important for a big chunk of the population that only buys a house every 10 years. Because people go to the gym more often than that. YouTube is pretty good, and people still use personal trainers.
And that should allow the agent to theoretically make a lot more money than they make today. I think one of the things you also mentioned in your presentation that on average, agents in the US and also here in Brazil sell less than 1 home per year. So increasing frequency is good for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, there might be a little bit of a power law. Of the $100 billion in residential real estate commissions in the United States, the vast majority goes to a small percentage. I mean, I still think that what happens to the overall pool is that the commission should go down. Like, what is a disruptive company? A disruptive company is not one that kind of sees a big pie and then they kind of take that whole pie. They typically shrink the pie. Now, Uber is a different example where, like, they grew the pie, but the amount of money that you spend on an Uber is much cheaper than you would spend on a taxi. So, like, the best companies, actually, I forgot who said this, but the best companies tend to be 10 times better and much cheaper. Because if you can combine better and cheaper, then, like, you guarantee yourself a win. If you just are better, or if you just are cheaper, it might not matter. So, like, there was a company called MySQL, which was a free database. And the market for databases was huge, and they just sold support. That's how they made money. And Oracle bought the company for $1 billion because it was actually like somebody would pay $2 million for something. Now you could get the same thing for like $5,000. Like, that's really, really disruptive. So the $100 billion of commissions in the US, I think that goes down dramatically because many of these people are getting just overpaid. Like, if you just list a house in a hot part of the United States, you get 3%. You know it's going to sell, and incentives are not aligned between the agent and the consumer. So I think probably a steady state is maybe 1% to 2% all in, just given like the cost of real estate going up, the commissions kind of staying flat, and that's kind of what you've seen in many other parts of the world. It's kind of trending towards that figure. So I think the market will shrink. Agents will probably look more like salaried employees that maybe get some kind of bonus, but it's not like eat what you kill commission based, because there should just be a central marketplace where you go to see all the inventory. What's for sale? You have trust that the thing's actually for sale or not for sale, and it's just such a broken model right now in almost every major market.
One of the interesting questions that have come in here, I like this one, kind of a little bit more sinister, but still kind of leveraging the vision that you have. If we're sitting here 5 years from now and we're assuming yesterday Loft shut down, so Loft failed. Why did Loft fail? What happened?
Was there a meteor that hit somewhere? And
let's
No.
assume that
Okay.
the Earth is still spinning.
Okay, the Earth is still spinning. So, well, it's always hard to talk about. Like, there are so many ways that things can go wrong. So I'll just talk about the basic ones of kind of the macroeconomic risk and then kind of the operational complexity. So I'll address it from those two perspectives. So in 2008, obviously the financial world fell apart, and anybody who was holding inventory of any kind of asset was kind of screwed because there was no liquidity for that asset. So something that you held where you just saw, oh, I have this overnight security, I can go sell it tomorrow. Well, suddenly tomorrow there was no market for it, and there were, you owed money to, your debt capital, and you couldn't pay it. So, Lehman Brothers should not have failed, but it failed because there was no market for a lot of the assets that they had to meet, and so therefore they couldn't meet the obligations because of that lack of liquidity. And fundamentally, you're dealing with a very traditionally illiquid asset. My hope is that if the marketplace thing works, like houses no longer become illiquid. It doesn't take a year to buy a house, because think about it from this perspective. You might have a house and it's on your balance sheet, it's illiquid, but if you said, okay, I'll sell it for 10 real, somebody's going to buy it. Like some crazy person will say, all right, this is something that it should cost 1,000 times more, I'll buy it for 1,000 times less, done. But there will be another economic downturn, and protecting yourself from that, I think, is pretty important. Like, how do you not protect yourself? It's like, a lot of it is just over-optimism. Like, nothing can go wrong, and the capital markets that exist today will exist tomorrow. So there was a company called Bill Me Later, which was kind of, in many respects, the spiritual predecessor of Affirm. And Bill Me Later almost went bankrupt because Citibank, giant bank, was giving them all of their credit. And then Citibank said, even though they had a contract, yeah, we can't do that anymore because we're almost bankrupt ourselves. So it almost bankrupt, like they only had one source of capital. So, there's that kind of macroeconomic shock, and making sure that you have backup plans to the backup plans to the backup plans, both in terms of the capital that you're using to acquire the homes and also the contingency plans on what you do with that inventory. And the best example there is that there's this giant REIT called Invitation Homes, which some of you might know. So Invitation Homes was started by Blackstone in the depths of the financial crisis, and they did exactly what I was just mentioning, where like they would find these homes that were foreclosed on. Banks just wanted to get rid of them. They'd buy something that was really $200,000. They'd buy it for $50,000. Now, what do they do with that? They'd rent it out, because you could rent out a $200,000 house for, I don't know, $12,000 a year. But if you only paid $50,000 for it, wow, you're getting a 25% yield. So,
And rents don't go down don't
rents,
go down as much because
exactly,
people
they need a place
somewhere.
to live. So, again, if you said, okay, we're totally fine having one source of capital because we trust this billionaire who's going to give us money, and he's always kept his word before, and nothing can go wrong.
That would be you, or?
Yeah, I'm not a billionaire, but on the debt side, things do go wrong, and then it's like, hey, if things go wrong, we'll just figure it out. Well, it might actually be helpful to figure out what would we do if we had all of these debt servicing obligations to make on the one hand, and then 2,000 homes on our balance sheet that we can't sell on the other. And that may very well happen. And you need to have a plan for that. So like that would be number one. And then just the operational complexity as well. Like this is a really, really complicated business. I've seen this through the lens at Open Door where, sometimes for them to figure out if like they'll buy 1,000 homes in a given week or two, and then they don't know for another year if they made money on those 1,000 homes, because buying the house is not hard. You're giving away money. What's hard is actually making a profit on that at the end, subject to the macro risk that I just talked about. So it's like, what if you get over your skis? I know there are no snow mountains here, but if you get a little bit, if you know the legend of Icarus, okay, this is working really well. We're going to go 100x this because it's going to work out just fine, and we're going to raise more money. There's no macro risk, but you can imagine being a little bit too ambitious without understanding enough of the variables. And that's kind of another way that things could go wrong. So that's kind of more within your control. I think both of these situations, frankly, are within your control because people always need a place to live. And fundamentally, you're not selling Red Bull, where it's like it's a fad and maybe it goes away. You're not selling something that like people care about today, they don't care about tomorrow. You're selling something that people will always want. You're buying something that people want to sell you. You're selling something that people want to buy from you. You just have to be more flexible and have more backup plans and contingency plans. And if you don't, that could be a problem.